In this lesson, we will read in a data file and prepare it for its use in subsequent lessons, where we will get to learn the filtering and pivot table functionality of Excel. I go to Excel and open the file Summer Olympic Medals 1976 to 2016. So what this file contains is this file contains all the medal winners for Summer Olympic Games from the Montreal 1976 Olympics to the Rio 2016 Olympics. The very first column is the city where the Olympic was held, the year in which it was held, the sport for which that specific medal was won, the specific event within the sport for which the medal was earned. For example, within rowing, the broad sport of rowing, what was the specific event for which that medal was won? Who won that medal? The name of the athlete, the gender of the athlete, male or female, the country to which the athlete belonged, and the country is given in terms of a 3-letter code, and the medal that was won, a gold, silver, or a bronze medal. To begin with, this file you would notice is not sorted in any specific order. So let us sort it in the order of year, increasing order of year. Within a year, we'll sort it by the sport, and within the year sport combination, we'll sort it by event. So we select our entire first, we select all our data. How do we do that? We select our entire first row and then do a shift control down arrow. And you would see it's a large file. It has 18,917 rows, or in other words, it has the data rows are 18,916. Why? Because the very first row is a header row. So we select this data, then go to data, sort. My first order of sorting is year. So I select year, and I need to sort it in an increasing order of year. So I select smallest to the largest. And you would notice I've selected my header. My data has headers at the top right-hand corner. Why? Because I'm using column headers. My second level of sorting, so I do a add level. Then within a specific year, I want to sort it by sport, and I want to do that in an increasing alphabetical order. So A through Z, A to Z. And then within a year sport, I want to further sort it on the specific event. So I add another level and add event there. Again, event is sorted in an increasing order of the alphabet. And I do an OK. So now my data has been sorted as per my sorting scheme. Further, this file at the bottom left-hand corner, if you see, you would see what we call as worksheets, different worksheets. So currently we are using the worksheet which is called medalist. There is yet another worksheet in the data called country codes. So what are these worksheets? These worksheets can be thought of as different pages in a book. Just like a book has many pages, your Excel file could have many worksheets. What are the uses of these worksheets? So for example, you could have all your sales data in one worksheet, sales data for your company in one worksheet. You could have all the inventory data for your company in a second worksheet within the same Excel file. You could have the cost data in a third worksheet, again within the same Excel file. You could have data on employees in yet another worksheet, all within the same Excel file. So those are the advantages of organizing data across different worksheets. How do I add a worksheet to my Excel file? It's simple. You see that plus sign at the bottom left-hand corner. I click that plus sign. It adds a worksheet. It gives it a default name. I can drag that worksheet to place it in whatever order I wish to place it in. I could also change the name, do a right click, rename. I could give it any name. I could add further worksheets. I could also delete the worksheets. I do a right click on the worksheet, delete. I do a right click, delete, and so on. So the second worksheet that I have in my file, country codes, what it contains is, it contains the country code in the first column and the corresponding name of the country the name of the country that corresponds to that specific country code. So what I'll be doing is I'll be using this information to put in the country names in my data in the worksheet middle list. So if I go back to my worksheet middle list, you would notice that this file only has a country code. It does not have the name of the country. So my aim here is to pick up the name of the country from the second worksheet and put it in this specific worksheet. So what I do is I insert a column and give it a name, country. So I'll be using the VLOOKUP command to pick up the name of the country which corresponds to the country code. So I do a is equal to VLOOKUP, open parenthesis. So the very first input in the VLOOKUP command is what is my lookup value? What do I want to look up? In this case, I want to look up the country code, which is given in column G. So I select that, comma. The next input is where is my table array where I wish to look up this value. In this case, my table array or the lookup table is in a separate worksheet, which is called country codes. So I go to country codes and I select this column, select this table. And you would notice this table is sorted in an increasing order of the very first column, which is important. So I select this entire lookup table. Then I go back to my file. Then the next input, so if you look at the formula there and on the upper side of the spreadsheet, the next input after putting a comma is to put in a column index number. That is, once I have looked up the value, I've looked up the specific value in my lookup table. That is my lookup table. Notice it has been prefixed by the worksheet name country codes. Once I find that, I want to output the country name, which is in the second column of the lookup table. Hence, I give a column index number 2 and comma. And the final input is, do I want a exact match or I want an approximate match? So I want an exact match. So I put in a false there. And I close my parenthesis. So that completes my VLOOKUP command. And notice in this case, I'm using the VLOOKUP command across different worksheets. And then I press an enter. And you would notice in my worksheet, the corresponding name of the country, which corresponds to that specific country code, has been put in. In this case, Italy. Now I can copy and paste this formula. But remember, before copying and pasting it, I need to fix the referencing. So I go back to my formula. So when I copy and paste, I always want the lookup table to always refer to A2 through B139 in my country codes worksheet. So I put in appropriate dollar signs there in front of the alphabet as well as in front of the numeral, fixing the columns as well as fixing the rows. So I've put in appropriate dollar signs there. I do a return, and now I can copy and paste this. So I select this, take my cursor to the bottom right-hand corner till I see a thin plus sign, do a double click. So now you would notice country name corresponding to the country codes has been put in this file. So what we did here was we used a VLOOKUP command, looked up values across different worksheets in an Excel file. This lesson introduces the data filtering capability of Excel. We will learn how to apply filters to a data file, and we will also learn how to then use those filters to selectively view data. Data filtering feature in Excel, though very useful, is often underutilized. Here we'll use a file that we used in an earlier lesson, the file that contains data on medals won across Summer Olympics, to see how can we incorporate filters and then use them in Excel. So let's open that file. We go to our Excel software, open that file, Summer Olympic medals 76 to 2016. So in an earlier lesson, we had inserted the column country in this file using the VLOOKUP command. Now what we'll do is we'll attach filters to this file. So how do we attach filters to this file? I select all my data by selecting a row, doing a shift control down arrow. It selects all my data. And then I go to data, click on data, and you would notice there's an icon there, filter. So I'll click that. And if I move my cursor to the top row, you would now notice that filters have been added to my data. How do I know that? Across columns, you'll notice these down arrows have been put next to the various column headers. So if I click on a down arrow, for example, if I click on the down arrow for the column year, it gives me all unique years in my data set, 1976 to 2016. Similarly, if I put a down arrow next to the city, it gives me all unique cities in my data set. And so on. For example, if I put if I click the down arrow next to event, it gives me all the events, specific events within sports. Next to the down arrow, if I click the down arrow for sports, it gives me all the unique sports, and so on. So how do I now use these filters? Let's say I want to find out all the gold medals won by Japan. Or to begin with, let's say I want to simply look at all the medals won by Japan. So I go to my column country, click the down arrow. First, I deselect all the countries by clicking once again on select all. So it deselects all the countries. Now I go down and select the country Japan. I select the country Japan, do an OK. Now the data has been filtered so that I only see medals won by Japan. Next, I want to filter it. As I said, I want to see all the gold medals won by Japan. So keeping the country filter Japan on, now I go to medals. And how do I know this data is filtered? If you look next to the column heading country, you would notice a small icon shows up. So that is telling me that this data set has been filtered using the country column. So next I want to select only the gold medals won by Japan. So I click the down arrow next to medal, deselect all, and then select only the gold medal and do an OK. So now once again an icon appears next to the column heading medal telling me that it has also been filtered using the medal column. So now I have all the gold medals won by Japan across all these Olympics from 1976 to 2016. Further, let's say I want to wish to look at only the 2012 London Olympics. So gold medals won by Japan in 2012 London Olympics. So once again, I filter it. I go to the year column, deselect all the years, and I'll select only the 2012, which was the London Olympics, and do an OK. So this is the total number of golds, 6 gold medals won by Japan in the 2012 London Olympics. How do I remove filtering? So if I want to now not filter my data, it's simple. Again, I go to data. If I want to remove these filters, I go to data. And next to the filter icon, there's a clear icon there. So once I click the clear icon, it will clear all the filters in the data. So it has cleared all the filters and I get back my original data. One more example, if let's say I want to find out which country won the maximum number of gold medals in the 2012 London Olympics in the sport boxing. So in the sport of boxing in 2012 London Olympics, which country won the maximum gold medals? So I start by filtering. So first I could use the sport column to filter out all boxing data. So I deselect all sports. I select only the boxing data. So these are medals only for boxing. Then maybe I can filter it out based on the year. I wish to see only the London Olympics, which were held in 2012. So I select only 2012. So now it has given me all the boxing medals won in 2012 Olympics. I want to only look at the gold medals. I deselect the medals, select only the gold medals, do an OK. And now it gives me all the gold medals that were won in the 2012 London Olympics for the sport boxing. And if you look at this data, it seems that Cuba as well as Ukraine, they both won 2 gold medals each. So both Cuba and Ukraine won the maximum number of gold medals in the 2012 London Olympics in the sport boxing. One final point, we saw how can I remove filtering from my data. I go to data and clear, so it clears the filtering. How do I remove the feature of filtering? So you see these down arrows. If I don't want to see them, I want to remove this feature of filtering. Again, very simple. I click on data and simply I again click the filter icon. So it toggles between adding filters and removing filters. So now notice the filters have been removed from my data. In the following lesson, we introduce pivot tables, a very powerful data summarization tool. We get an understanding of what a pivot table is and begin to construct one in Excel. Use of pivot tables in Excel. So what are pivot tables? Pivot table is a data summarization tool within Excel. And what it does is it allows me to create data summaries in various formats. I can slice and dice data in my Excel file across different formats to view different kind of summaries of the data. It is easy to use and it is also dynamic. What do I mean by dynamic? That if my data changes, the summary which is produced in the pivot table also appropriately changes. Let's look at it by way of an example. So let's open a file that we've been using earlier, the file on Olympic medals won across different Olympics. So let's open that file. So this is a file that contains the medals, data on medals won across different Olympic games. We have used this file earlier. So one possible data summary from this file could be that I may want to look at a summary where it lists the various countries on the vertical axis, and on the horizontal axis, I want to see the total number of medals won by those countries, broken across number of gold medals, silver medals, bronze medals. So I could use a pivot table to construct such a summary. Now notice this file is a large file. If I do a control down arrow, you would notice it contains close to almost 19,000 records. So getting this data summary in any other way might be a little difficult. A pivot table, we'll see, makes it a very easy process. So how do I insert a pivot table? I click on Insert. The very first option is Pivot Table. I click on that. It'll ask me, where is my data range? So I select my entire data, including the column headers. So I select my very first row and then do a Shift Control down arrow. So it selects all my data. Next, it asks me, choose where you want the pivot table to be placed. So I could either use a new worksheet or I could place it in the existing worksheet. I'll choose a new worksheet. I'll have a separate worksheet to put my pivot table in. So I choose new worksheet and do an OK. So once you click OK, you will notice Excel has produced a separate sheet and put the pivot table inside that sheet. Excel has named that sheet as Sheet 1. I can always change the name of that worksheet. Let me change it to Pivot Table. I'll rename it to Pivot Table. Right click, rename, and I'll rename this worksheet as Pivot Table. So what this worksheet contains is, on the left-hand side, you will see it has produced a template of a pivot table. And on the right-hand side, if you look at these columns, these fields that it has produced, it has gone inside the data and picked up all the column headers that I have in my data and placed them here. And at the bottom, I have these different tools that will help me organize the pivot table. Now, in this worksheet, if I click anywhere other than the pivot table template, if I click anywhere else, you would notice the options that I see on the right-hand side vanish. If I click anywhere on the pivot table, those options on the right-hand side reappear. So my aim here is to produce a data summary which lists the various countries, name of the countries, and on the horizontal axis, it lists the total number of medals broken across gold, silver, bronze won by those countries. So I go to the right-hand side, my pivot table fields, I select country, do a left click there, and keeping my left click on the mouse pressed, I drag it and place it where it says rows. So once I place it, you would see that it has gone inside the data and put all the countries on the left-hand side. Let me increase the zoom level. So all the countries now have been listed on the vertical axis. Next, on the horizontal axis, I wish to put the number of medals won by these countries across these various years of data that I have for the Summer Olympics. So once again, I go to my pivot table fields, I select medals and drag it by pressing the left click till to where it says columns. And you would notice now what Excel has done is, Excel has gone inside my data, figured out that there are only 3 categories of medals, bronze, gold, and silver, and placed them in the horizontal axis. So now I have a template of my data summary in the format in which I want it. Next step is to populate this pivot table. So once again, I go to my pivot table fields on the right-hand side, select medal, and now I'll drag it to where it says values and place it there. So now what has happened is Excel has gone inside my data, figured out number of bronze, gold, silver medals won by these various countries and put them appropriately in the table. And it has also produced a grand total number of medals won by these various countries. For example, the country Algeria, across these various years of Summer Olympics, it has won a total of 15 medals. 5 of them were gold medals, 4 of them silver, and 6 of them bronze. So this completes our basic pivot table setup and a basic summary that we have produced. In subsequent lessons, we'll continue with our use of the pivot table functionality within Excel. This lesson continues with the construction of a pivot table, which we introduced in the previous lesson. We further explore various options available to summarize data and present it in a summary table, also known as the pivot table. Continuing with our study of pivot tables, we use this file, Summer Olympics 1976 to 2016, which contains all the medals won during Summer Olympics from the Montreal 1976 Olympics to the Rio 2016 Olympics. In an earlier lesson, we had inserted a pivot table into this file, and we had inserted it in a separate worksheet, which we called pivot table. So let's go to that worksheet. So this is a pivot table, and you would notice anywhere in the pivot table, if I click, I see the options for the pivot table construction on the right-hand side. So the pivot table that we had constructed, the data summary that we had constructed using the pivot table was, on our vertical axis, we had all the country names, and on the horizontal axis, we had listed down the total number of bronze medals, gold medals, silver medals won by those specific countries, as well as the grand total sum of all the medals won by that country. Now, Continuing with this pivot table, if we want, we could sort the pivot table. We could either sort it as per the row labels, which will sort it based on the countries. We could also sort it by the column labels. So let's sort it using the column labels. My column labels are bronze, gold, silver. Let me sort it in a reverse alphabetical order. So sort Z to A. So now you would notice it has been sorted in a reverse alphabetical order: silver, gold, bronze. Though in this case, it makes more sense to have the bronze medal, then the silver, then the gold. So I could also manually sort it. So how I do that is I select the bronze column header, take my cursor to the right hand edge till I see a cross sign. Once I see that, I drag it and place it wherever I wish to place it. So now it has been sorted. I manually sorted it: bronze, silver, and gold medal. Next, what if I want to see this data summary only for the 2012 Olympics, which were held in London? So I want to see this same format data summary, but only for the 2012 London Olympics. So for that, what I can do is I can use the filter option on the right hand side available in the pivot table tools. So what I do is I select the year and drag it and place it where it says filters. And once I do that, you would notice if you go back to your pivot table, on the very top, it has put an year there, and now it allows me to filter based on year. So if I click that down arrow next to year, I have these various options: 1976 to 2016. I could filter based on whatever year. So I want to look at only the 2012 London Olympics data. So I select 2012. I could also select multiple years, or I could also select all years at the very top. So I select 2012. I want to see only data for the London Olympics and do an OK. So now this data has been filtered. And notice on the very top next to year, I have that small icon which indicates that it has been filtered using only the year 2012. So now I'm seeing the medal tally only for the 2012 London Olympics. Next, if I want to see for the 2012 London Olympics, the medal tally only for a specific sport, let's say boxing. So in that case, first I'll have to set up a filtering mechanism using sport. So again, I go to the right hand side. I click on sport and drag it and place it where it says filters. So now I want to filter based on year as well as sport. Once again, you see sport being shown at the top of my worksheet. And I click the down arrow and I can select a specific sport, in this case, boxing, and do an OK. So now it has been further filtered. I have all the medals won by various countries in the 2012 London Olympics only for the sport of boxing. How do I remove this filter? So easy. If I want not to filter on boxing, I click on that. I simply select all. So now all sports are included. How do I actually remove that facility to be able to sort on sport? I go to the right hand side. I click on sport and my pivot table options, drag it and place it back to where it says pivot table fields. So that filtering option, my ability to filter based on sports, is removed. Next, what if I want to make an addition to this data summary? So currently this data summary is all the countries and the number of medals that they won in the 2012 London Olympics. So what if I want these medals to be broken up across various sports? For example, Australia in 2012 London Olympics won a total of 114 medals. What if I want to see how these 114 medals were distributed across various sports? Or in other words, I want to add the specific sports information to this pivot table. So what I do is I go to the right hand side, select sport, drag it and place it where it says rows beneath the country. So now what has happened is, for every country, this medal tally for the 2012 London Olympics has been broken up according to sport. So if I scroll down, for example, now for Australia, you would notice Australia earned a total of 114 medals in the 2012 London Olympics. 59 were bronze, 37 silver, 18 gold. And how were they distributed across various sports? That's given beneath that. So these are the various sports that Australia won medals in, and how were they broken up as per bronze, silver, or gold medals. And at the very bottom of the pivot table, I have these grand totals. The grand total bronze medals, silver medals, gold medals, and the sum of all the medals. So that's how we can add to the various summaries that we can produce using a pivot table. Extending our study of the pivot tables, we now apply it to numeric data as contrasted to categorical data used in previous lessons. The use of numeric data allows us to do a lot more arithmetic manipulations in our pivot table. We demonstrated it using sales data from a store in Canada. We'll now be applying pivot tables to numeric data as contrasted to categorical data, which we applied pivot tables to in the previous lesson, where we use the data from medal tally across various Summer Olympic Games. So what is numeric data? Numeric data is data where you can do various arithmetic calculations, such as you can add, you can subtract, you can find the averages, you can find the minimum, you can find the maximum, and so on. To illustrate this, we'll use data from a file which we have used in some previous lessons, the store sales file. So let's open that file. So it contains data from an online office supplier based out of Canada. So this is the store sales.xlsx file. So this file contains sales data from this online office supplier based out of Canada. So in this lesson, what we're interested in, we want to see a summary of sales from this company across various provinces. So we have a column province, we also have a column sales. We want to see sales across various provinces throughout the data. So we'll use a pivot table to look at that summary. So we insert pivot table. I select my data. I select all my data. First, I select my row, and then I do a shift control down arrow to select my entire data. And I'll put my pivot table in a new worksheet and do an OK. I'll rename this worksheet to pivot table. And also I'll increase the font size of this worksheet, increase the zoom level of this worksheet. So now on my left-hand side, I have a template of a pivot table. On the right-hand side, I have the pivot table fields and the various tools. If I click anywhere on my worksheet other than the template, those pivot table field vanishes. If I click anywhere on the pivot table template, I again see those pivot table fields. So what I'm interested in is in seeing sales across various provinces. So what I do is first I select province, drag it to where it says rows, and you would notice now Excel has gone into my data and figured out the total number of provinces and listed them. So on my vertical axis. So I want to see the total sales across these provinces across the entire period of my data. So I select sales and drag it to where it says values. So it has now given me the sum of sales across these various provinces. Mind you, these are summed across all the years of my data. So let me reformat this sales so that I see only 2 decimal places. I select this data, do a right click, go to format cells, number, and select 2 decimal places and do an OK. So it has now been formatted with 2 decimal places. So in this case, I have calculated the sum of sales, but I could also calculate other summaries of sales. For example, I could calculate the average sales, the minimum sales, the maximum sales, and so on. So how do I do that? I put my cursor anywhere in this column, do a right click, and go to value field settings. Click on value field settings. And here you would notice I have various options. Currently, I'm summing the sales. I could also do an average of sales. I could also do a maximum, minimum. So let me do an average of sales. So I click on average and do an OK. So now what I get is the average sales across the period of my data across these different provinces. I could also do a minimum or maximum. Again, do a right click, value field settings. I could do a minimum sales, do an OK. So this is the minimum sales that was ever observed across these provinces, across the entire span of my data. Next, if I want to see a summary of sales across these various provinces, but now also across each of the 4 years of my data. So let's do that. Let me first change this sales summary, which is currently the minimum of sales, to the sum of sales. I do a right click, value field settings. I change it to sum of sales. So now what I want is this total sum of sales I want to see broken up across different years. So to do that, I go back to my right hand side in the pivot table fields. I pick up the order date, drag it, and place it where it says columns. So what it has done is now it has separated the overall sales across various years. Now notice I could choose various levels of grouping. For example, if I do a right click on any of these column labels, do a right click, I could select the grouping level. I select group, and currently you would notice the data has been grouped based on months, quarters, years. If I simply wanted years along with quarters, I want to see the quarters also, so I deselect months, I do an OK, and now you would notice I have my sales across years and shown across quarters. I can also, if I want, I can hide the pivot table field that I see on the right hand side. So anywhere on the pivot table, do a right click, hide field list, and it will hide the pivot table field list. So now I see this data across years broken up across different quarters. I could also do the same thing across years, across various months. So let me just view my data only across years. So I do a right click, group, select the group level, and choose only years and do an OK. So now I see my data only across years, the 4 years for each of those provinces. And notice the last column is my grand total sales for that particular province. And in my case, the maximum sales occur for the province of Ontario in Canada. Next, if I further want to see this summary of sales across provinces across different years, but I now want these sales to be broken up across the 3 product categories that this office supplies store sells. So how do I do that? So once again, let me again bring out the pivot table field list on the right hand side by doing a right click and show field list. So I see my pivot table fields. So what I'll do now is I'll go down, select my product category. This is the category of products that the store sells, drag it and place it beneath province. I could have also placed it in the columns box, but I would place it in the rows box. So notice what has happened. Now Excel has gone inside the data, figured out that there are 3 categories of products, and for each of the province, it has now broken up the total sales across these 3 product categories: furniture, office supplies, technology. So, for example, in the province of Alberta, the grand total sales is given there. And how is this grand total sales broken up across different product categories? That's shown beneath it. And so now I see a more detailed summary of sales. If, for example, in this data, I want to see a specific year, I could do that. I could select these column labels. I could select only a specific. I'll first deselect all years. And then maybe if I want to see only 2018, I select only 2018, do an OK. So now I see data only for year 2018. I could also select multiple years, 2018, 2019, do an OK. Now I see only for 2 years. And I could also select all my data, that is all years. This lesson begins to explore the charting and graphing feature of Excel. Here, we introduce the popular graphs available in Excel and start to learn how to plot a line graph. Charts, also known as graphs, are a useful way to visualize data. In Excel, some of the popular and often used charts are the line charts, the column charts, and the pie charts. Let us illustrate their use using data from our file storesales.xlsx. So let's go to Excel and open the file store sales. So this file contains data, the sales data from an online office supply store based out of Canada. So what we want to do is we wish to visualize sales across different provinces, across different time periods. So for that, first we'll organize the data into a pivot table and then visualize those data summaries using a line graph. So let's insert a pivot table. Insert pivot table. So my data gets selected. If it doesn't get selected, I can always manually select the data, do an OK. I'll produce a pivot table in a new worksheet. I could always rename the worksheet. I could also increase the zoom level. So next, I'll create a data summary. So I'll grab my province. I want my sales across different provinces, across different time periods. Grab the province and place it where it says columns. So what it has done is it has gone to the data, figured out the provinces and placed them across columns. Recollect, in an earlier lesson, we had placed the provinces across rows. In this case, just because it will be a little easier to construct a graph, I have placed it across columns. Next, I pick up my order date, drag it to where it says rows. So it has collapsed my time periods across years. I wish to see my time periods across months. So I go to anywhere on this column, this row labels, do a right click, click on group. And within this, I would deselect quarters. I'll only keep the years and the months selected. So now what has happened is it has now produced the template for year, and within year, the 12 months. I'll now populate this table. So I'll grab my sales from the right hand side, drag it to where it says values. So it populates this table. I could always change the formatting so that I only see 2 decimal places in my sales. So I select my data, do a right click, format cells, number, only 2 decimal places, do an OK. Next, further, let's say if I want to visualize the sales data only for specific provinces. Let's begin by, and for specific year, let's begin by visualizing the sales data for the province of Alberta only for the year 2016. So I can collapse these other years by clicking on the negative sign next to it. So I've collapsed these other years. I wish to only visualize sales for Alberta for the year 2016 across the 12 months. So for that, I'll insert line graphs and visualize this sales. So I put my cursor anywhere outside my pivot table and then go to insert, and you would see a host of charting options available there. I'll choose the line graph or line chart option. Within that, I have multiple options. Within the line graphs, I have multiple options. I'll choose the very first option, which is the most popular option. So a blank template is produced. A blank template. I need to now fill up this template. So I put my cursor anywhere on this template, do a right click, select data, add, click on add, give the series a name. So since I'm plotting Alberta data, I'll give it the name Alberta. And where is my data? I do a is equal to and select my Alberta data for the year 2016, January through December. And do an OK. Another OK. So it produces this line graph. The horizontal axis, notice, it has numbered the months 1 through 12. I can always change that. I go back to my data, do a right click, select data. And now on the right hand side where it says horizontal axis labels, I click on edit and select the axis label range as January through December and do an OK. Another OK. So now it has produced a graph for sales in the province of Alberta across the 12 months in year 2016. What if I want to add more provinces to the same graph? I could do that by again doing a right click, select data, add, click on add. And let's say I wish to, I'll add the sales for British Columbia. So I'll give the series name British Columbia. And again, once again, series values, I'll select it. I'll do a is equal to and select the sales for British Columbia, January through December, and do an OK. Another OK. So it has now also added the sales for British Columbia in the same graph. I could also add a legend for it. So next to the graph, the rectangle box, you would notice a plus sign there. If I click on that plus sign, it allows me to add a legend there. So I click on that. So you would now notice a legend has been added. So I see Alberta in blue color, British Columbia in red color. I can further add more provinces to this graph. For example, if I also wish to add the sales across Ontario in 2016 for these 12 months, I would do again a right click, select data, click on add, series name Ontario, and my series values I'll do is equal to and select the sales data for Ontario, January to December, and do an OK. Another OK, and I can expand this graph. So now I have sales across 12 months in year 2016 for 3 provinces, Alberta, British Columbia, Ontario. And generally speaking, from this graph, you would notice that Ontario, generally speaking, has higher sales than these other provinces. In the next lesson, we'll add on to this graph by adding chart titles and axis titles, and also introduce the other popular charts in Excel, namely the bar graphs and the pie charts.
Thank you for watching our video. We hope you found it helpful. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button below and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. If you know someone who could benefit from this information, please share it with them. We would love to hear your thoughts on this learning course, so please leave a comment below. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.